Good morning. So, in playing my D&D adventure board games over the last few weeks and enjoying them for what they are, tabletop, cooperative, Dungeons and Dragons dungeon crawls that can be played with, up to five cooperative players or solo, whatever, one to five. But it got me thinking about D&D 4th edition, and the only book that I kept from my 4th edition collection was my favorite book in the series. The essential books were fantastic. They were, in a way, rewritten and remastered 4th edition rule books by Mike Mearls and company, and the companion. They also had the complete rule book, which was in a monster guide that just took all the 4th edition stuff and cleaned it up and made it more sensible, I guess. I don't know. Of the original books that I owned, I had the Player's Handbook, hardback, the original, the Monster Manual, and the DM's Guide. And the DM's Guide is actually one of the better books in the history, I think, of Dungeons and Dragons. However, it was all based on the 4th edition. So these were the essentials. And they came out with a few. I did have the companion monster guide. I don't think I had the rules compendium, but I had the companion monster set. I think with the tokens, if I remember right. But I gifted all that stuff to Big Mike because they were playing 4th edition, and I just wasn't. It wasn't my thing. But I'd only run a couple of games. I had enjoyed playing a character in some of Big Mike's sessions, so I did enjoy 4th edition for what it was. Right? But I didn't. I don't think I. How can I say this? As we age and as we mature and as we experience things, you start to question whether you had the right mindset when you delved into these things. For what 4th edition was, indeed, what was it? And, what was I looking for at the time, and what was so foreign to me made me judge it harshly, etc. I'm not certain. I do know I've never appreciated the power bloat of these modern D20 games where you just get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Okay, but the point is, this is the only one I kept, and there's a reason for that. Because this, to me, is the heart of Dungeons and Dragons, which is the cleric, fighter, thief, magic user. So this Heroes of the Fallen Lands literally was just these classes: clerics, fighters, rogues, wizards. So it took you back to the original basic D&D books where you had 4 classes. And I think it only has elf, magic, elf. I'm not certain. I can't remember because I haven't looked at it. You can see it's in great shape. I just haven't used it much because I intended on running something locally here with Big Mike's group. Locally, that was going to limit them to the 4 original classes, which to me, part of my problem is I don't like games that it's just so many options. I just don't want to see the what do you call me, artificer, or I don't want to see the necromantic undead, magic user. I mean, I just it gets way too out there for me. Very cool. Again, Mike Mearls, I think, really did a great job simplifying the game and tightening the rule set. Roll a d20. You want to roll high. That's it. There's 3 rules. Add all relevant modifiers to that d20. Compare the total to the target number. And if you make it, you're good. If you fail, if you don't, you fail. Specific beats general. Always round down. Right. Fantasy world, which is cool. Right. The dungeon master, the adventure, the players. Tiers of play, again, D&D 4th edition as well as 13th Age had these tiers. I think 13th Age, though, from the get-go, it was like you were at the heroic tier and you only leveled up to 10. So it was like 13th Age was D&D 4th edition, but you start at the heroic tier, the epic tier. So 13th Age was like they just wiped out all the preliminary stuff and went right to characters that are considered, in a way, epic tier. In my opinion, and I liked 13th Age. Very cool. Again, it was like a version of 4th edition to me. I mean, it wasn't. It had nothing to do with D&D, but it was written by the guys that were part of this 4th edition group. The essential products, starter set, rules compendium. This is the other one I had. I think I had that one, and I gave to yeah, Heroes of the Forgotten Kingdoms, which add rangers, again, paladins, all the things I'm less interested in. Druids, paladin, ranger, warlock, dragonborn, all that nonsense. For me, that's not D&D, so I can't. This is one reason I won't play 5th edition, or I won't, not, it's not just the engine, is we can simplify it, but it just goes all over the map as far as the world, as far as this high fantasy kind of stuff, which is just not my thing. Encounters, there are combat encounters, there are non-combat encounters. That's pretty simple, right? So I mean, what made this game so tough? Well, I think it was, part of it is where you're at when you're looking at these things. Exploration, taking your turn, examples of play, and again, a nice example here. Playing the game, checks, ability checks, attack rolls, skill checks, and ability checks. Those are the things, and then the opposed check. So again, very, very cool. When will you make checks? Either attacks, skill checks, ability checks, or opposed checks. There we go. There's your rules. Is that pretty obvious? Is that pretty common? Yep, we do it all the time. Depending on whether a game has skills or not, we won't do skill checks, but attack rolls, very simple. Roll the d20, add your modifiers to beat the armor class, and then roll your damage. Skill checks, ability checks. Combat, determine surprise, establish positions, roll initiative, take surprise round. So pretty clean, right? We find ourselves surprised. Everybody's positioned on the map, because again, this was a maps and minis game. Then we roll initiative. The guys that were surprised, of course, are the guys that have surprise automatically trump initiative, and then we take our turns in initiative order. We begin the next round, and again, you don't re-roll initiative, I don't believe. Right, you just start back with initiative phase, skipping surprise, and then repeat the steps until there's either they stop or somebody is defeated. Structures of a turn, you start the turn, actions, the actions you can take. Triggered actions, opportunity, immediate. And I think this was where I, as a GM was overwhelmed. It's like, wait a minute, I got to keep track of triggered actions, opportunity, immediate. Plus, as they leveled up, they would get more and more ability cards. Basically, you'd start to see this like almost a deck of cards for your characters. Action points, to me, complicated things. It's like really, but again, probably strategically looking back now after enjoying the board game and saying, clearly this isn't like the board game, but in many ways, using abilities, etc., I'm reminded that maybe I missed the boat on this. Maybe I just wasn't in the right mindset to understand how much fun and how different this was from the third, second, advanced D&D, and of course the game I grew up with, which I did appreciate. It was different, but I don't think I recognized how much fun or how much joy could be had in this particular version. Attacks, movement, modifiers. You've got your, if you're fighting with advantage, it's a +2. If the attacker's prone, it's a -2. If the attacker's restrained, if the target, if the target is superior cover, -5. So again, we got simple modifiers for your d20. Damage, and then of course damage rolls, durations, saving throws. And again, I think you save now. I think the saving roll was different. You saved versus like fortitude, willpower, I think. I think the saving throws in this started to look more like Pathfinder, right? I can't remember. Let me see here. Okay, this is what again I'm beginning to appreciate from the D&D adventure games. You have everybody has a melee attack at will. That's just what you do. Your melee attack or your missile attack or right. So this also has your bull rush, right? Power. So these are your default attacks. In other words, everybody in the game will have a melee attack, probably a ranged attack if they have a ranged weapon. They can do a bull rush, they can do a grab, and they can do an opportunity attack. And it's much simpler when you just see it like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So much simpler, right? You're not overwhelmed with Jesus. I got too much stuff to do here, right? For me, right? Remember when I came back to tabletop gaming, and I had been playing for like 15, 18 years. I bought the 4th edition books at a local store and went, what the hell is this? And, it was just overwhelming. And then, of course, got Labyrinth Lord. Actually, I may have gotten Labyrinth Lord before I bought the books, the 4th edition books at the local store. I can't remember what came first. I thought I got Labyrinth Lord first, but I just remember getting the 4th edition books and being immediately, it just didn't look, it looked more like a board game than it did what I grew up with. So anyway, it's just not that complicated. Everyone's going to have a melee weapon. Well, if they have a melee weapon, they're going to have a melee attack. They're going to have a ranged attack option. And of course, some classes, you're going to have multiple melee options, right? Like the board game. And I keep pointing up because it's up above me on my shelf here. But anyway, hit points and healing. Where is it at? Bloodied. Again, if you got if you got hit down to half your hit points, you were bloodied. It was kind of a warning that you're vulnerable. Healing surges. Every class could just kind of heal themselves up, kind of like a tough it out in a way. A second wind, or actually, second wind might have been like that. Let me read this real quick because again, I haven't even looked at this. The bloodied value of the typical creature equals 1/2 of its maximum hit points. A creature is bloodied when its current hit points drop to its bloodied value. Most healing requires a creature to spend a healing surge. When a creature does so, it regains a number of hit points equal to its surge. An adventurer can use his or her second wind to spend a healing surge. Okay, so on a second wind, they get to use a healing surge. Okay. Adventurers can dig into the resolve and endurance and find an extra burst of vitality once per encounter. As a standard action, a character can spend a healing surge to regain hit points and gain +2 bonus to all defenses. Now, I'm going to read that again. Once per encounter. So if we are fighting goblins and you get beaten down and you can take a second wind to burn a healing surge, you can't do it again until the goblins are dead, until that encounter is over. But again, let's say literally in the next room we end up in a fight with skeletons, I can use a second wind against the skeletons as well. A variety of sources grant temporary hit points, right? Death and dying. When an attacker reduces a creature to 0 or fewer, the attacker can decide to knock the creature unconscious. Otherwise, the character drops to 0. Hit points or fewer is dying. So you would have a choice with the goblins whether you're knocking them out or killing them, which I think is a good option for games that don't want. I think it's a good rule to have at any table, depending on the how your players feel about killing everything. Defeating them and killing them, you can narratively call that a rout or something. If you don't want to play games that are all about murdering monsters or whatever, but that would just be like a family-friendly table or whatever. Characters who are dying can continue taking damage until they drop to their bloodied value, expressed as a negative number. So half of my hit points negative, I would be at that point. Let's see here. Example, a character whose bloodied value is 25 dies when he or she drops to -25. That's interesting. That means you would have 50 hit points because bloodied is half of your hit points. So this is a pretty fat character with 50 hit points. While dying, a character must make a death saving throw at the end of each of his turns. A roll of 20, and on a roll of 9 or lower, the character slips closer to death. On a roll of 10 or higher, there's no change, but you have to keep rolling until someone can heal you, basically. Healing and dying. When a character's dying, receives a healing, he or she will go to 0 and will regain hit points from the healing effect. If the healing effect requires a character to spend healing surge, he or she has none left. The character is restored to 1 hit point and at least is no longer dying. Short rest and extended rest. So I think in 5th edition there's short rest and long rest, I believe, right? About 5 minutes long. Short rest consists of stretching one's muscles and catching one's breath, right, after the encounter. And you can use a healing surge, as many healing surges as you want. So this is a chance for players to take a deep breath and recover stamina. And again, if you look at hit points as really stamina, and you only become vulnerable to death once your stamina is gone, instead of looking at hit points as actual wounds. This stuff's easier to understand. Extended rest is at least 6 hours long. That would be camping and a meal, or up to 12 hours. A character not only sleeps during this extended rest, but doesn't have to. The character can engage in light activity and require much exertion. At the end of the extended rest, the character regains all lost hit points, any lost hit points. So again, less lethal, as we assume hit points are more like stamina. So if we visualize, your hit points are really your endurance, your stamina, and you only become vulnerable to death. Imagine negative, hitting zero is just somebody caught you with the final blow in a way, which is a smart way, I think, to look at hit points if you don't like the idea of being chipped away. Most people, I don't think, put much thought into it, but it does matter to me, kind of how we go from 18 hit points to being chopped down. How do we post combat take a deep breath and heal a wound in my arm, right? I mean, that's very difficult for me to conceptualize when I'm playing more realistic and gritty. You don't heal blows. You don't. I don't care how you get back to 18, but I would assume you've been chopped up, cut up. So visualizing his stamina is actually a more interesting. It's got making characters, chapter 2. Have you played Redbox? And then, of course, again, the reason I kept this one and the reason I was going to use this book for any D&D 4th edition at the time was I wanted the players to play the original D&D classes, and I wanted to stay to the original races. Dwarf, elf, halfling, human, and of course there's this Alderan thing, which, again, was new to me, as this comes out of some D&D lore that I'm unfamiliar with. But you could be a fighter, cleric, rogue, wizard, which was very cool. And a fighter could be a knight, defender, so that would be your role in the party, more of a tank. Slayer is more of a striker. You're going to do more melee. You're going to do more damage. So this had definitely video game, as I think anybody who's familiar with 4th edition, definitely they were, I think, attempting to put in perspective how a tabletop role-playing game could be much like the video games they had played. Tanks, strikers, healers, etc. The rogue thief is a striker. This is the problem with turning D&D into a sheer combat game. The thief as a striker, to me, it makes no sense. But I mean, what are you going to do when you make Dungeons and Dragons into a combat game? And again, I think everybody will admit the original D&D used war game mechanics, right? But the thief didn't exist, I believe, in the original OD&D, right? So again, once the thief was kind of brought on board in the with Holmes and Moldvay, the thief class, right? I think they were thinking of the game as slightly different. They were trying to put in that character that was from fiction and from literature. But again, here's a great example. The thief as a striker is kind of bizarre to me. I don't see that. But again, this is why guys want to hide in shadows and backstab, backstab, backstab. And the wizard as a controller makes sense, right? The guy kind of commanding the troops, pumping up your buddies, etc., etc. So again, what I liked about this was we were staying with the 4 key classes, and basically the races that come out of basic D&D from my childhood, and what I recognized for what I thought fantasy was, which was Lord of the Rings, which was dwarves, elves, halflings, and humans, for the most part, and then of course the anti-civilization, the anti-cultures of the orcs and the goblins and the right. They were the clear enemy of the civilized world. So I like seeing my fantasy that way, right? It's easy to see it as good versus evil, or civilization versus anti-civilization kind of thing, culture versus anti-culture. Anyway, and then this Eldarin thing, which I still don't know what it is. I've really not ever read what the Eldarin is. And then how to create, which is very cool, right? So now this book literally lets you create any of these things. And so it allows you to take 4th edition and just call it into original basic D&D, basically. Interesting, though, they also list the Forgotten Kingdoms. So if you wanted to get that book, there is a D&D Essentials Heroes of the Forgotten Realms, or Forgotten Kingdoms, and it lists what's in that book: Druid, Paladin, Ranger, and Warlock. And then Dragonborn, Drow, Half-Elf, Half-Orc. So again, all this stuff, Tiefling, this is where I can't do that kind of fantasy. Goodbye, I'm not interested. I've never been a big fan of the Paladin. The Ranger, of course, for me, straight out of Lord of the Rings. I love the Ranger class, but to me, it's a fighter that is less armored and more ranged. So I always think of the Ranger as the fighter who uses ranged weapons and less lighter armor, no shield, right? So that's to me simple. And of course, Rangers might have some skills like healing, herbology, that kind of stuff. So I don't dislike the Druid in the idea of what is a Druid. It is it's a pagan cleric, basically, to some degree, or magic user. And then the Ranger fits solely. I mean, it just makes total sense, even looking at history, right? Warlock, of course, I suppose, right? Hexblade, whatever that is. And the Paladin comes out of some great literature, but again, it's not something that I ever. With the cleric, I always felt that we got our noble kind of, so I get it. It's definitely part of fantasy and fantasy literature, but it just didn't fit into my D&D worlds, right? And then how to create characters, how to select your equipment, and the class stuff, which is very cool. Your role. So then again, it defines, again, we're talking about role playing. Ironically, they define it, right? You're going to be a controller. This is what you kind of do to help the group in combat. A defender, a leader, striker. And then we get into the races and Eldrin. So here it is. A graceful and magical, these elves of the Feywild love arcane magic, swordplay, and mental challenges of all sorts. Okay, so we've got an elf, and then for some reason we have another elf. So I'm assuming this is the kin to the Eldarin. Elves dwell in the deep forest. So we got basically a wood elf and a high elf. Skyrim, I guess you got the wood elf and then the high elves or something. Okay, again, kind of interesting that elves would get multiple. Yeah, multiple. Okay, and then the halfling, of course, is the hobbit. Ability scores and then your modifiers. This is the other thing that threw me when I first saw D&D 4th edition. I could see you could get up to plus 12. You could get a strength of up to. I mean, this just blew my mind. I said, man, that's a lot of math. I'm going to be adding plus 12 to every melee attack and plus 12 to. That's just. And of course, we never got to those tiers. Of course, I only ran probably 4 sessions total of 4th edition. And I actually ran it for the Big Mike's and David, and I can't remember who all was at that table. And I ran it in the Dragon Age universe, so I just used the Dragon Age lore and canon, but I ran 4th edition. And we had a great time. Or I did, anyway. So it worked. Strength, dexterity, none of that stuff's changed. Choosing skills of powers, feats. So this is the other thing that when I first, and then this is cool because you can determine your ability scores or another way. There's other methods to getting your ability scores. Of course, they were arrays. Take these numbers, place them, and you can build the character that suits the class you want to be. I don't really have a problem with this. So, it makes your characters. We don't have these incompetent characters, especially in a game where pluses are a big deal, right? And but you could also, there were other ways to do it. I think it mentions it in the player's books, right? In the compendium, there's other ways to derive these scores, but it gives you a few choices. If you want to be a dual specialist, a dual specialist, or balanced, you get to place these numbers. Then you choose your skills, your powers, your feats based on your class, right? Selecting equipment, filling in the numbers, initiative, speed, defenses, hit points. This was much easier to create a character in this than it was in the original Player's Handbook. It always blew my mind. It was so confusing in the Player's Handbook when I first got it. But again, I was somewhat of probably an idiot. Wasn't really paying close attention. Your defenses, right? Your hit points, your healing surges, your temporary modifiers, and then your base attack rolls, your base damage, right? So there's a lot of stuff that was on that character sheet, and there were tiers. As you created your character, it's like you started to derive and do more and do more, and so you had like these 4 pages, a character sheet with 4 pages. Of course, some of them had your powers, your daily powers, your utility powers. Bonuses and penalties, attack checks, and character details. Alignment, unaligned, good. And I always liked alignment. I won't lie, I liked alignment. And I actually, in basic D&D, liked alignment languages. It would allow, let's say, a chaotic thief in our party, or if Jeff or Ron or somebody was playing, say, a chaotic thief when we were kids, and they bumped into goblins. They couldn't speak goblin, but they were chaotic creatures. One of the players would be capable of communicating in that dark speech, so to speak, right? So I kind of like the idea that you can definitely narratively understand why there would be such thing as alignment languages. But again, you have to understand the narrative of that. What kind of language would that look like? Well, I mean, if it was good, I mean, if it was a good language, it would harken back to some ancient religious scripts in which they're speaking Old English kind of thing, or Hebrew, right? You're going back to the origin of Latin or Hebrew, right? Or in a fantasy kingdom, and it's chaos, chaotic, evil, or whatever. They'd be speaking in tongues. They'd be speaking in some kind of dark language that would be understood. Even if you couldn't speak Goblin, you could. So it's just a language. It's maybe they're ancient languages, from way back good and way back evil, right? And then you could pick some personality traits to kind of cue you so you could be consistent in your play, I suppose, as a character, as opposed to actually thinking about human beings or elves and how they might be a thing. And then background. Languages are listed here for those just gods, which is cool because this is something, again, I rarely do in any of my games. I don't define the gods. I like to leave that to the players. Joe says, I'm a cleric of the sun god, and I just say to him, okay, what is this? What is the gist of your holy order? And that becomes as relevant as any god I can invent on the fly. But it's nice to see they make an effort to put in justice, god of knowledge, god of storms. So that's cool. It keeps everybody consistent, I guess. And then a listing of these so-called gods, right? And then, of course, again, looking at deities, evil and chaotic deities, gaining levels, step-by-step advancement, ability scores, level modifier, paragon, and epic tier. And that's something I would never do. I would never play paragon or epic. I want to keep it at the first tier, which is, I guess you would say, 0 to hero tier. For me, is my favorite. Gaming always has been. It keeps it gritty and kind of low level. And it's measures that the average competent soldier stepping up to face great challenges, as opposed to an immortal godlike person doing what they're required to do, right? Right. Okay. Hit points, class features, feats and powers, retraining, replacing a feat, replacing a power. Okay, and then we get into understanding how powers work. Usage types, at wills, dailies, and encounters. So some powers can only be used in encounters, which would clearly be. And then daily powers, power formats. How you would write them down or look at the cards if you had cards. So, and then you get all the kinds: flavor text, the keywords, action types. So they really walk you through even what's on the cards, right? They're gonna really teach you how to read the game material, so to speak, which I think is, again, I believe rule books are really textbooks. They should be teaching you not only how to play to some degree, but what everything means if you're going to get in games that are this deep, this sophisticated as far as rules. Let's see here. Attack and utility types, choosing targets, areas of effect, how all that stuff works, keywords, range, line of effect, line of sight, power source. Again, this was maps and minis really focused. When I ran it in Theater of the Mind for the group, and it worked fine, right? It worked fine. I just would put stuff in 5-foot moves or 20-foot moves or whatever, and whether you were facing your target, etc. Again, reducing much of the tactical issues that would arise in 4th edition Maps and Minis combat to trivial, which is that's what happens when you take a game with tactics like Pathfinder, 4th edition D&D, that requires maps and minis because some of the cards even refer to how these things work. You're basically trivializing the tactics and making it simpler for everybody just to imagine the combat. But it does a disservice to the tactical portion of the games, right? Why you would use a daily power in a particular moment, or it makes sense. Effect types, channeling, healing, illusion, poison, stances, teleportations, right? And then now we get to the character classes. So that's just your power and utility rules. And then your character classes, right? This would be, of course, when you're building it. And again, why I liked this particular book was it was the 4 original classes. And then breaks into the cleric, who can be a war priest, basically. So you're really a cleric war priest. right? And then you are the dwarf, and then of course the races for cleric, and then we'll get over here to, and then your feats, all your choices, ability scores, equipment, defense, etc., and then the heroic tier, right? So as we start out with what they call the heroic tier, which is where I would play and stop. I wouldn't want to play beyond 10 if I played this. So that would pretty much be the end of that campaign, so to speak. And I'm really not a big fan of going beyond 5, to be honest with you. But healing word, pretty cool, right? All the domain, their daily power choices. So you select what these things are you can do, right? And again, after playing so much of the advanced board game, I start to appreciate a part of the game that one of the reasons I had disliked it was this idea of these things you can do. This is all I can do, kind of thing. Well, it's all you're doing anyway. In old D&D, the cleric can turn, and at level 2, he finally gets the ability to pick a spell, a divine intervention. I can heal now, right? Well, it's no different. It's just it puts it, it puts it in a way you can readily understand, and then of course strategically and tactically use these abilities during play. So it's not so much this is all I can do. It's like, well, that's all you can do in old D&D is turn undead at level 1, or all you can do as a fighter is swing my sword, and that's it. That's right. So this at least gave the sense that the fighter had other things that they could do, not just spam their sword over and over and over and over. So anyway, it goes through all the spells, the divine stuff, and then of course it gets to the paragon level. So this is we're still at just the cleric class. So how many pages is being used to define the cleric, to give you an idea of how deep this is. So it starts on 80. We don't wrap up the cleric class. Then epic war priest, this is levels 20 plus. Powers. So I just want to point out how deep and how very interesting the rule book, how the book was put together. Still trying to get to the next class, fighter. Okay, so from 80 to 122, so what's that, 42 pages. So 42 pages of just the cleric and everything they can pick, do, and level up, how to build that character. That's pretty awesome, really, when you think about it. That's a pretty intense bit of information for the cleric. That's pretty war priest, cleric war priest, which that's pretty badass if you ask me. So 42 pages for just your cleric. That's a lot of depth there, right? They did not take for granted that D&D was the bell cow, was the legacy of tabletop gaming. So you got to give them some credit, Fighter. And again, I'm sure this is about 40 pages. Let's go to 160 something, see if it gets the same amount of pages, which would give you an idea again of how the fighter, as you level up, can be just as powerful as the other characters and creature classes. A rogue, holy cow! So the fighter is actually 40. Wow, the fighter's actually 43 pages. So the fighters in actually 43 pages for their class. I mean, that's significant. Honestly, name another game, because this is defining the fighter knight, and remember, there's 2 for this. There's the knight and the slayer. Okay, so there's technically 2 variants of the fighter here for this 45 pages. But what's fascinating, I can't think of another game, and again, it covers all the way up to the epic tier, so that's pretty intense. Yeah, thief, who knows? The rogue, again, one of my not so favorite classes, even from basic D&D. It's like, really, I don't dislike the roguish kind of character, but the idea of and again, look at this. We're talking about. Oh wait, I've already passed. So the thief's not as big. Jeez, I don't think. Let me get. Okay, this is all magic users. Okay, there's the mage. Wizard. So the thief is 68 to 91. Wow. So not quite as much going on here with the thief all the way up to the epic level. So the thief is much simpler, really, when you think about it. The thief is a simpler class, which is interesting. And then, of course, our wizard mage. And I'm assuming this is pretty intense because of all the spells. It's got to be a big one. And there's the dwarf. Now we're getting to the races. Yeah, and this is 192 to 245. So that's 50 pages, basically, right? To the wizard. And that makes sense with all the spells and powers and daily powers and stuff. So that's pretty intense. This book is about 300, not counting the glossary, the index, 352. And we got about half the book, not quite half the book, is just your 4 classes. That's pretty good. And then now we get to the races, and again, the racial benefits, skills, acrobatics, which is fine by me, I get it, nature, streetwise. Feats, now this is where I really started to get irritated. It's like, geez, we also have feats. I mean, it was just something, there was something everywhere, all over the place, and it's a lot to track as a dungeon master. Gear and weapons, which is cool, that would have been in here with art, which is cool. And reading magic and scrolls and staves, etc., etc. And then a glossary index and a glossary of terms and treasure stuff, which again, all of these things show up in those D&D adventure board game systems, which is pretty cool. You could make characters in this and transport them, literally just trim away all the stuff you don't need, and you could actually make characters and take those character cards on index cards and bam, play D&D adventure board game. You really could. Obviously you'd have to reduce damage to 1 or 2 points because that's how the game works, the damage in that game. So you wouldn't be rolling damage dice, variable damage dice, so to speak. Very cool. But this is the only book that I kept. And you could, for the most part, create characters and use them in those adventure books, adventure games. However, no monsters in here. They did have a monsters companion book, which was loaded with all the monsters, like a giant, smaller, very thick tome of monsters, which was pretty cool. Anyway, I just want to share that, a walkthrough of this very interesting and harkening back of late, mostly because of my experiences of the last 15 years, my opportunity to play games like Peace and begin to appreciate the tactics and the strategies and the choices that a player has outside of just being a personality, and enjoying lots of different games, really, but mostly. And then, of course, in my feed, I noticed there were a handful of people I'm not necessarily subscribed to, but because when I'm on YouTube, I'm generally checking in on my subscriptions to my colleagues, my peers that are in the gaming business. So very often on my feed, I'll see these other YouTubers that are harkening back to 5th edition or 4th edition, or they're looking at other games. And I noticed in my feed, after I uploaded the D&D adventure game thing, it was weird that in my feed, again, thank you, artificial intelligence algorithms, because I mentioned in that video verbally that it's like 4th edition, but not. All of a sudden in my feed over the next few days, I was getting these 4th edition videos popping up. And they were of people I don't know, but they were of substantial channels on YouTube in our hobby that were looking back at 4th edition. And I watched a couple of them and I thought, geez, I'm not the only one that said, maybe I missed something here. Maybe I misunderstood 4th edition. So that's kind of neat. But it shows you how we can also change perspective and maybe realize I didn't get it. I was coming back to role playing from a very rigid and closed-minded attitude, I suppose, and probably didn't recognize how well, to be honest, what a great game this was. Probably, even if it wasn't popular, and even though it probably alienated the 3rd edition guys, the advanced D&D guys, who ended up running the Pathfinder, and Pathfinder's market share dominated. It showed you where the current fan base wanted their game to be, so they got the hell out of D&D and went into that. I didn't like either. I mean, I still, I'm not I'm not an advanced D&D third edition 3 whatever it was, 253 and Pathfinder. I'm still not those, and even D&D fifth edition. These are choices I don't make, but I can see how I missed the boat with fourth edition. And Big Mike, I mean, he ran fourth edition. We had a ball, and Big Mike ran fifth edition, and we had a ball. So what it really came down to is not so much what I wanted to enjoy as a player. It was what I could tolerate being the referee. And I have a very high resistance threshold to too much stuff for me to track. It's too much like a job, and if you're not having fun and it feels like work, then then forget it. As a player, ironically, I enjoyed all those experiences. So it shows you that I didn't dislike it. Ironically, I just couldn't imagine being a DM under this load, right? So, thanks for watching. Good day.